He offered 10 furs for a single night, but the widow gave him far more. Sedona, Arizona, 1830. The summer heat in Sedona was merciless, baking the red rocks until they shimmered like furnace coals. Grace Lawton was 42, weathered by loss, hardened by survival. Her husband Thomas had died 6 months prior, crushed beneath a wagon wheel, leaving her with debt, 3 skinny chickens, and land she couldn't work alone. She was hauling water from the well when the coyote struck. One moment her hens were scratching peacefully, the next, feathers exploded in the afternoon air. Grace grabbed her late husband's rifle, aimed, fired. The predator fell, but so did her last laying hen. She stood there, staring at the dead bird, feeling the weight of another loss, when she heard it. Heavy footsteps, labored breathing. A shadow fell across her doorway. The man was massive, easily 6.5 feet tall, his left side dark with dried blood. He leaned against her doorframe, his face pale beneath weeks of trail dust, his eyes fever-bright and desperate. "Ma'am," he rasped, his voice like gravel, "I need shelter, just one night." Grace raised the rifle, her hand steady despite her racing heart. "I've got nothing for drifters." "I'll pay." He unslung a heavy pack, wincing with pain, and dropped it at her feet. 10 beaver pelts, prime quality, dark and thick, tumbled out. "These, for one night on your floor." Grace stared. 10 pelts, enough to pay off Thomas's debts, enough to buy seed and livestock, enough to survive another year. But the man was dying, bleeding, and men, even dying ones, were dangerous. "Why so much?" she demanded. He looked past her, at the thin wisp of smoke from her chimney, like a man staring at salvation itself. "Because I'm desperate," he whispered, and collapsed. Grace caught him before he hit the ground, though how she managed to drag 200 pounds of unconscious man inside remained a mystery. She barred the door, kept the rifle close, and tried to ignore the way her small cabin suddenly felt suffocating. His name, he'd mumbled before losing consciousness, was Jacob Stone. The wound in his side was infected, hot to the touch, the flesh around it angry and swollen. She'd seen infections before, knew this one would kill him without help. Grace heated water, gathered her sewing supplies, and the last of Thomas's whiskey. This was foolish, tending a stranger, but she'd made a bargain. One night, she'd honor it. When she poured whiskey into the wound, Jacob's eyes flew open with a roar of agony. His hand clamped around her wrist, hard enough to bruise, his gaze wild and unfocused. "Easy," she said, her voice calm despite her hammering heart. "I'm cleaning it. Hold still or you'll lose more than blood." Something in her tone cut through his delirium. His grip loosened. His head fell back, teeth gritted, as she worked. She'd birthed calves, stitched up horses, mended Thomas after bar fights. A man wasn't so different. The bullet came out, a flattened piece of lead, followed by a gush of corruption. She cleaned, packed, stitched, and bandaged with steady hands. As dawn broke, the fever took him completely. He thrashed, called out names, begged forgiveness for something she couldn't understand. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Grace sat in her chair, the rifle across her lap, watching him fight invisible demons. She wondered what kind of man carried such guilt, and what kind of fool she was, for hoping he'd survive to tell her. Before we continue, if you're enjoying Grace and Jacob's story, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss what happens next. And please, comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to know. Jacob woke to sunlight, the smell of coffee, and the certain knowledge that he should be dead. He tried to sit up, his side exploding in white-hot pain that stole his breath. A woman's voice, sharp and unsympathetic, cut through the haze. "Don't be stupid. You'll tear the stitches." He turned his head. She was at the stove, her back to him, her faded dress doing nothing to hide the lean strength of someone who'd fought hard years. Not young, not soft. But there was something about the set of her shoulders that spoke of unbreakable will. "How long?" he managed. 2 days. You've been raving." She poured coffee into a tin cup, walked over, and handed it to him. "Drink. Then you can explain why a man trades a fortune for a night on a stranger's floor. The coffee was bitter, strong, perfect. Jacob drank, buying time, trying to decide how much truth to offer. I was being followed, needed to disappear. Followed by what? Law? Outlaws? Angry husbands? Does it matter? Grace sat down, her gaze direct and unforgiving. It matters if they're coming here. This is my land, my home. If you've brought trouble to my door, I have a right to know. Jacob looked at her, really looked. She wasn't afraid. Wary, yes. Cautious, certainly. But not afraid. Thomas, her dead husband, must have taught her the wrong lessons about men. Land dispute, he said finally. Down in Texas. I worked as a scout, thought I was doing honest work. Turned out the man who hired me was stealing territory from settlers. When I figured it out, when I refused to help him anymore, he sent men after me. So you ran. I fought first, then I ran. He touched the bandage on his side. One of them got lucky. Grace studied him, weighing his words. Your night's up at sunset. Then you leave. Agreed. But as she turned back to the stove, Jacob noticed something. The cabin's roof had a sag, dangerous and deep. The door didn't hang straight. The fence outside was half collapsed. This woman was holding on by her fingernails, and something inside him, something he'd thought long dead, stirred. Jacob didn't leave at sunset. Not because Grace stopped him, but because he couldn't. The fever returned with the darkness, racking his body with chills despite the summer heat. Grace, with a weary sigh that spoke volumes, threw another blanket over him and went back to her repairs. By the third morning, the fever finally broke for good. Jacob woke clear-headed, weak but alive. He watched Grace work, splitting kindling with precise strikes, her movements efficient and practiced. When she came inside, he spoke before she could order him out. Your roof's about to cave in. I'm aware. South corner, near the chimney. It'll go with the next strong rain. Could kill you. Grace set down the firewood, her jaw tight. Then I'll fix it before the rains come. With what? You've got no timber cut, no tar. And that shoulder you keep favoring says you can't swing a hammer like you need to. He pushed himself up, gritting through the pain. I'll fix it. You can barely stand. I'll be standing tomorrow, and I'm strong. He met her gaze. Let me work off the debt. You saved my life, tended me, fed me. The pelts were for one night. Let me earn the rest. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. It's trade. Jacob gestured at the cabin, the fence, the struggling garden. You need help. I need a place to heal, to hide, just until I'm strong enough to move on. 1 month. I'll fix everything that's broken. Grace wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed that letting this man stay was dangerous. But she looked at the roof, the fence, the 100 tasks she couldn't manage alone, and felt the weight of practicality crush her pride. 1 month, she said finally. You sleep in the barn. You don't come in the house without permission. And if those men you mentioned show up, they won't. If they do, you leave. Immediately. I won't lose my land because of your mistakes. Jacob nodded, relief flickering across his hard face. Grace had made worse bargains. She just hoped this one wouldn't kill her. The days fell into rhythm. Jacob, true to his word, worked like a man possessed. Despite his healing wound, he rebuilt the fence line, patched the roof, cleared the irrigation ditches that Thomas had let go. He spoke little, worked much, and kept his distance. Grace watched him from the cabin, her hands busy with mending, her mind uneasy with questions. He was skilled, precise, but there was something almost desperate in the way he threw himself into labor, as if he were trying to outrun his own thoughts. They established rules without speaking them. She left food on the porch. He ate alone in the barn. She worked the garden. He worked the structures. They moved around each other like strangers at a crossroads, polite, careful, never quite meeting. But small things began to shift. Jacob started leaving firewood, perfectly split, stacked by the door each morning. Grace found herself cooking more than she needed, portions sized for 2 instead of 1. Neither acknowledged these small kindnesses, but both noticed. One evening, as the sun painted the red rocks gold, Jacob approached the house. Grace tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle by the door. "The well," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "The support beams are rotted. Needs to be re-braced before someone falls through. I'll add it to the list. There's also," he hesitated, his gaze dropping to his boots, "there's a family, 2 ridges over. The Calhouns. Their youngest may be 8 years old. He's sick. Fever. I heard the father shouting for help when I was working the north fence." Grace's breath caught. How sick? Bad. Real bad. She'd never met the Calhouns, but she knew fever, knew how it could steal life in hours. She looked at Jacob, at this careful, broken man, and made a decision that surprised them both. "I know medicine," she said. "I'll go." They rode together through the twilight, Grace's healing kit wrapped carefully. Jacob silent and watchful beside her, and somewhere in that shared purpose, something between them began, almost imperceptibly, to change. If this story is drawing you in, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with Grace and Jacob's journey. Drop a comment and tell us, where are you watching from right now? We love hearing from you. The Calhoun boy survived, thanks to Grace's fever-few tea and cool compresses. The grateful family tried to pay her, but she refused, accepting only a basket of eggs and fresh bread. Jacob said nothing on the ride home, but she felt his gaze on her, thoughtful and weighing. Something had shifted. They began talking, small exchanges at first, about the weather, the land, the way the evening light turned the rocks to fire. Jacob revealed bits of himself, carefully chosen pieces. He'd been a scout, then a tracker, a man who lived between civilization and wilderness. "Why stay between?" Grace asked one evening, as they worked side by side, repairing the chicken coop. "Because I didn't belong in either." His hands stilled on the wire. "Out there, I was useful. In town, I was just another man taking up space." Grace understood that. The feeling of being useful versus being seen. Thomas had made her feel invisible, a pair of hands to cook and clean, never a person with thoughts or worth. "You're useful here," she said quietly. Jacob looked at her then, really looked, and Grace felt something dangerous kindle in her chest. This was supposed to be temporary, a transaction, but the way he watched her, like she was something precious and rare, made her forget every rule she'd set. The trouble came on a Monday. Grace was in the garden when she heard horses. 3 men, rough-looking, wearing dust and swagger in equal measure. The leader, a thin man with cold eyes, dismounted without invitation. "This the Lawton place?" "It is." Grace stood, wiping dirt from her hands, her pulse quickening. "State your business. We're looking for a man, big fellow, dark hair, traveling alone. Heard he might have passed through Sedona." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "He's wanted. For murder." Grace's blood turned to ice, but her face remained calm, a skill learned from years of hiding fear from Thomas. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Mind if we look around?" "I mind very much. This is private property." The man stepped closer, intimidation in every movement. "Ma'am, we're lawmen. We have authority." "Then show me a badge." Silence. The man's smile vanished. "That's what I thought," Grace said. "You're not law. You're bounty hunters. And you'll leave my land, now." Behind her, she heard the barn door open, heard Jacob's footsteps. The world seemed to slow, crystallize, as he walked into view. The lead bounty hunter's eyes lit with recognition and greed. "Jacob Stone. Been looking for you for 3 months." His hand moved toward his gun. "You're coming with us." "No." Grace stepped between them, her heart hammering but her voice steady. "He's under my protection." The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Lady, you don't know what you're harboring. This man killed 2 men in cold blood. He's worth $500. Then prove it. Show me a warrant, a judge's order, something official." Grace crossed her arms. "Or admit you're just hired killers looking for an easy payday." The tension stretched, brittle and dangerous. Jacob stood behind her, silent, and Grace could feel the coiled violence in him, waiting. The bounty hunters were armed, 3 against 1, but something in Grace's unwavering stance made them hesitate. "You're making a mistake, ma'am," the leader finally said. "When we come back with the law, if you had the law, you'd have brought it the first time." Grace's voice was iron. "Now get off my property before I exercise my right to defend it." The men left, but their parting glares promised this wasn't over. Grace waited until the dust settled before turning to Jacob. He was pale, his jaw locked tight. "You should have let me go," he said quietly, "and let them murder you for money." "No." Grace walked past him toward the house, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "Inside, you're going to tell me everything. No more half-truths." They sat at her small table, the afternoon light streaming through the window, and Jacob told her. All of it. About Henry Blackwood, the land baron who'd hired him to scout territories in Texas. How Jacob had believed the work was legitimate, helping settlers find good land, until he'd discovered Blackwood was forging deeds, driving families off their claims through violence and fraud. "I found documents," Jacob said, his voice hollow. "Proof of everything. Names, dates, stolen land. I took them, threatened to go to the territorial governor." He rubbed his face. "Blackwood sent men after me. I fought. 2 of them died. Not murder, self-defense. But Blackwood has connections. He twisted it, made me the criminal." Grace absorbed this, weighing truth against instinct. "The documents. Do you still have them?" "Hidden, in 3 different locations. If anything happens to me—" He met her gaze. "But that's not your problem. I'll leave tonight. Draw them away from here." "No." "Grace, no." She stood, her decision made. "Those men know you're here. Leaving now just makes you easier to catch. You stay, we prepare. And if they come back—" She reached for Thomas's rifle. "We'll be ready." Jacob stared at her. This fierce, stubborn woman who should have turned him in, who should have protected herself first. "Why are you doing this?" Grace thought of all the times she'd been powerless, all the times Thomas had made decisions for her, about her, without asking. "Because it's my choice, and I choose to fight." Grace and Jacob worked through the night, preparing the homestead like a fortress. They moved supplies into the root cellar, checked ammunition, reinforced the doors. They didn't speak of what might come, but the weight of it hung between them like summer thunder. Near midnight, exhausted, they paused. Jacob sat on the porch steps, staring at the star-scattered sky. Grace brought him coffee, sat beside him, careful to leave space between them. "Tell me about Thomas," Jacob said quietly. Grace hadn't expected that. She cradled her cup, considering. He was charming at first, made promises. "We'd build something together," he said. "A real life." She smiled, bitter. "Turns out he meant I'd build, and he'd drink away the profits." "Did he hurt you?" "Not with his fists. But there are other ways to hurt someone." Grace looked at Jacob. "He made me small, made me believe I was nothing without him. When he died, I mourned the man I thought I'd married, not the man he became." Jacob absorbed this, his jaw working. "I'm not him." "I know." Grace met his eyes. "You're nothing like him. Thomas took, you give." The space between them felt charged, electric. Jacob's hand moved, hesitant, until his rough fingers brushed hers. A question. Grace's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her hand, palm up, and let him take it. "Grace," he whispered, his voice rough with something that might have been longing or might have been fear. "When this is over, when I can clear my name, A sound, distant but distinct, horses, multiple riders, moving fast through the night. They were on their feet instantly, coffee forgotten. Jacob grabbed his rifle. Grace took hers. They positioned themselves at opposite windows, weapons ready, as the hoofbeats grew louder. But the riders passed, heading toward town, their purpose somewhere else. Grace and Jacob remained frozen, barely breathing, until silence returned. "Tomorrow," Jacob said finally, "we ride to Santa Fe. To the territorial office. I'll turn myself in, but I'll make sure my story gets heard first. We ride, Grace corrected. Together. Jacob looked at her, at this woman who'd somehow become his anchor, his reason. If something happens to me, nothing will happen. Grace's voice was firm, because I won't let it. In the darkness, with danger circling like wolves, Jacob believed her. They left at dawn, riding hard, the red rocks of Sedona fading behind them. Grace had never travelled this far alone, had never ridden with such purpose burning in her chest. Jacob rode beside her, silent and watchful, his hand never far from his rifle. The journey took 2 days. They spoke little, conserving energy, staying alert. But at night, when they made camp in hidden arroyos, they talked. Jacob told her about his childhood, about being orphaned young, about learning to survive alone. Grace shared memories she'd thought buried, about dreams she'd had before Thomas, before duty crushed them. I wanted to teach, she admitted, staring into their small fire. Had a head for numbers, for reading, but my father said education was wasted on girls. It's not wasted on you. Jacob's voice was certain. You're the smartest person I've met. Grace felt something bloom in her chest, warm and dangerous. She was falling for this man, this careful, broken stranger who saw her as whole. On the second night, as they prepared to sleep, Jacob pulled something from his saddlebag, a small leather pouch. I want you to have this. Inside were the documents, the proof of Blackwood's crimes. Grace stared. Jacob, if something happens, if these are found, then you'll finish what I started. He closed her fingers around the pouch. Promise me. Promise you'll see it through. Grace met his gaze, saw the trust there, the desperate hope. I promise. That night, they didn't sleep on opposite sides of the fire. They lay close, not quite touching, but near enough to feel each other's warmth. It wasn't desire. Not yet. It was something more profound. Partnership. Trust. Grace, Jacob whispered into the darkness. Yes? Thank you for believing me. Grace reached out, found his hand in the dark. Thank you for being worth believing in. When they rode into Santa Fe the next morning, they rode as one. The territorial office was a squat adobe building, imposing in its plainness. Grace and Jacob dismounted, her hand steadying him when his wounded side protested the long ride. Together, they walked through the door. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up with bureaucratic disinterest. Help you? We need to see the territorial governor, Jacob said. It's urgent. The governor doesn't see walk-ins. You can file a petition. Grace slammed the leather pouch onto the desk. Documents spilled out, names and deeds and damning evidence. Then you file this, and you tell the governor that if he doesn't see us today, we're going to the newspaper instead. The clerk's eyes widened as he scanned the papers. His disinterest vanished. Wait here. They waited. An hour, then 2. Grace paced, her stomach tight with nerves. Jacob sat, conserving strength, but his eyes tracked every movement in the building. When the clerk finally returned, he wasn't alone. The territorial governor was a serious man with silver hair and sharp eyes. He listened as Jacob explained everything, his voice steady despite the weight of accusation. He produced more proof, letters from families Blackwood had displaced, testimonies Jacob had collected. Why didn't you come forward immediately? The governor asked. Because I was running for my life. Because Blackwood has connections, money, power. Jacob straightened. But I'm here now. I'm willing to stand trial, to testify, if you'll guarantee my safety and investigate these claims. The governor studied him. Then Grace. And you, ma'am. What's your stake in this? Truth, Grace said simply. And justice. This man is worth fighting for. Something shifted in the governor's expression. Respect, maybe. I'll open an investigation, But Mr. Stone, you'll remain in protective custody until we verify these allegations." "No," Jacob stood. "I stay with her, or I walk out that door and disappear." The standoff lasted heartbeats. Finally, the governor nodded. 2 weeks. Then you report back. Don't make me regret this." Outside, in the bright New Mexico sun, Grace and Jacob stood together. They'd done it. They'd spoken truth to power. And somehow, incredibly, they'd been heard. Jacob turned to her, his expression vulnerable. "Grace, She kissed him, right there in the street. A quick, fierce press of lips that tasted of courage and possibility. When she pulled back, his eyes were wide with wonder. "Later," she whispered. "Tell me later, when this is really over. If you're rooting for Grace and Jacob, show some love with a like and subscribe. And please, comment below. Where are you watching from? Your support means everything." The news spread fast. The territorial governor's investigation into Henry Blackwood sent shockwaves through Texas and New Mexico. Families came forward, adding their stories to Jacob's evidence. The weight of testimony became undeniable. Blackwood, cornered, tried to flee. He was arrested at the border, his carefully constructed empire crumbling. The bounty on Jacob's head was revoked, his name cleared. Grace and Jacob rode back to Sedona in late summer, the land still green from monsoon rains. The homestead looked different, smaller somehow, but welcoming. They'd been gone 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. That first night back, they stood on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the rocks in impossible colors. The silence between them was comfortable, full of shared history. "I should go," Jacob said quietly. "I'm free now. I can start over, somewhere." Grace's heart clenched. "Is that what you want?" He turned to her, his grey eyes intense. "What I want, what I've wanted since the moment you told those bounty hunters to leave, is to stay. Here, with you." He took her hands. "But I'm a decade older than you. I've got nothing but a name that's finally clean, and memories that wake me at night. You deserve better than—" "Stop!" Grace squeezed his hands. "Let me decide what I deserve." She pulled him close. This man who'd stumbled into her life dying and desperate, who'd worked beside her, fought for her, trusted her. She kissed him, not quick this time, but slow and deep and full of promise. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Not as payment, not as obligation. Stay because you want to. Stay because this—" She gestured at the land, the house, the life they'd built together. "This is worth building." Jacob's answer was to gather her close, to hold her like she was something precious finally found. "I want to wake up here every morning," he said. "I want to fix fences with you, to fight for this land, to grow old watching these sunsets." He pulled back, met her gaze. "Grace Lawton, will you let me stay? Will you marry me?" Grace felt tears, good tears, for the first time in years. "Yes, God help us both. Yes." They married a month later, under the wide Arizona sky, with the Calhouns as witnesses. It wasn't a grand affair, just 2 people choosing each other, choosing partnership over loneliness. On their wedding night, in the cabin they'd defended together, Jacob made love to Grace with a tenderness that erased every rough memory Thomas had left. This was different. This was equal. This was 2 people, scarred and survivors, choosing to be whole together. Afterward, as they lay tangled together, Grace whispered, "10 furs for 1 night, you severely underpaid." Jacob laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "So I'm in debt. For the rest of your life. Best debt I ever owed." 5 years passed. The homestead flourished. Jacob and Grace worked the land side by side, adding rooms to the cabin, building a proper barn. raising chickens and cattle. They hired hands when they needed help, paid fair wages, and became known throughout Sedona as honest dealers. The Blackwood investigation led to dozens of families reclaiming stolen land. Jacob testified at 3 trials, his name mentioned in newspapers as the man who'd brought down a corrupt empire. But he never sought credit or fame. He just came home to Grace, to the life they'd built. They never had children, but the Calhoun family became like kin. The boy Jacob and Grace had saved grew strong, and his younger siblings called them Aunt Grace and Uncle Jacob. The homestead became a gathering place, known for Grace's healing skills and Jacob's quiet wisdom. On their 5th anniversary, they rode out to the spot where they'd camped on their way to Santa Fe. The same hidden arroyo, the same desert stars. They made a fire, shared a simple meal, and talked about dreams for the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Grace asked. "Staying here? You could have gone anywhere." Jacob pulled her close, his chin resting on her head. "I could have gone anywhere and been nowhere. Here, with you. I'm home." He paused. "Besides, I still owe you for that night. 1 night for 10 furs. I figure I need about 50 more years to pay it off." Grace smiled against his chest. 50 years sounds about right. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who'd found each other in desperation and chosen to stay in love. The summer breeze carried the scent of sage and possibility. Jacob had offered 10 furs for a single night, a transaction born of desperation. But Grace had given him something far more valuable. She'd given him trust when he was hunted, purpose when he was lost, a home when he was wandering, and love, fierce and uncompromising love, when he thought he was unworthy of it. In return, he'd given her the same. Not a transaction, a transformation. As they rode home under the vast Arizona sky, their hands linked, their future bright, they carried with them the truth they'd learned. The best bargains aren't measured in furs or gold. They're measured in courage, in choosing partnership over fear, in building something lasting from the broken pieces of who you used to be. Grace and Jacob Stone, once strangers, now partners, would spend the rest of their days proving that the greatest trades are made not with possessions, but with hearts. Thank you for joining us on Grace and Jacob's journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the frontier. And one last time, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Until next time, may your own bargains be blessed.